Welcome to this very first episode of Rugby Unfiltered. Two of the rugby doyens, the wise men of South African rugby. Jan de Koning, former editor of Rugby 365, journalist, 40 years of experience, and Eugene Loffie Eloff, he says I must call him Loffie. Two Junior World Cup titles, long-time coach of the Lions, went to the USA as well. And they starting a rugby podcast here on Megaphone Rugby and on other channels as well. So welcome, Jan. Tell me about what's the idea behind this podcast?
Enver, thank you very much, and thanks for assisting us. Loffie and myself did a podcast many years ago. It was mainly audio, and we enjoyed it. I think it's fun. I enjoy doing podcasts. As you know, I enjoy your podcast as well. And I decided recently, when my situation changed, that this is a good opportunity to revive the podcast, except that we're now doing it on video. And I begged and dragged Loffie out of Paul to come and assist me, and I'm glad he said he will assist me. Loffie, thank you very much, and happy birthday for yesterday.
Oh, thank you, Jan. Yeah, birthdays are just a number. It's a privilege to do this again with you because, as you know, rugby is my passion, and although I'm semi-retired, I'm still very much involved in the game in a consultancy. Mentorship capacity, but I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, just quickly, I want to just give people some background for those who don't know you. Firstly, you're a journalist, like I said, 40 years experience. How many Springbok tours have you been on? How many World Cups have you attended? There's a picture of you floating around with Hendrik Cronje and all the other guys in 2023 after the World Cup win. Tell me about your history, just briefly, your journalist career.
I started in January 1981 at a newspaper called the Transvaaler, which now no longer exists. And to count Springbok tours, I quickly, New Zealand, Australia, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, major tours abroad. The last full tour, so it correlates nicely with next year. So the last full tour to New Zealand was 1994. That's a Springbok tour where we played midweek games and everything. And then New Zealand played in 96. And 94 I did New Zealand, 93 I did Australia, and then end of 94 we also did Wales, Australia, Ireland and Scotland. And then there was a World Cup, and I did the Lions tour in 2009. So yeah, it's quite a lot. I think it's come a full circle, and yeah, it's exciting to. I know a lot of people want to know. You must look back, and sometimes I do reflect on it. But I prefer to look forward, and Loffie will tell you that I'm a very positive person, and regardless of what happened in the past, I will always look forward to new and exciting challenges, which this is.
Okay, Loffie, now in your introduction, I briefly said that you've won 2 Junior World Cups, you've coached at the Lions and everything else. Just tell us about your coaching journey. You just said rugby is your passion. I also saw you've got a law degree and everything else. So a man of many talents. Tell me about your past.
Yeah, no, the funny thing here is I've actually had a military career for 18 years. Mm-hmm. And rugby was, like most South Africans, just in my blood. And being in the military still, I started coaching schools rugby, and actually a very small school that were underdogs. And all of a sudden, just to see how these kids got to believe in themselves and they won the competition, ignited me to work with underdogs. I really loved it. And then I started getting involved we won the Directors' Cup in 89 with Hoërskool Kempton Park. And I was involved with Tikkies and RAU, which is UJ now. And I got the call from Doc Late in 1997. And actually, I thought it was an old varsity mate of mine who played scrum half for Transvaal Boulevard and Rover, who was taking something out of me there. But it was Doc Late. And he said, listen, if I want a job, I need to come to Ellis Park. Needless to say that I spud. And it was a quick trip. And I stopped there. And that's where it began. And it was just wonderful. 11 years at the Lions. I think I played in 5 finals there, and we won 2 or 3. And then in that time, I was privileged to coach the junior box for 3 years, and we had 2 wins against New Zealand, 2 golds, and 1 bronze against England. And then after 11 years, I departed with the Lions, and it's a wonderful time that I had there. And then I came to Boland. Don't know if you remember the Boland's jerseys changed from the mustard and black to pink and black. We changed the color. And what a fantastic side. We had guys like Willie LaRue playing there. And we won the first division easy against the EP Kings. But in that year, there was no promotion or relegation. And then I did a stint in Austin, Texas, where we won the national championship there. So, yeah, I retired at 61. I played my last rugby game in Portugal at 61 at prop, and I was a scrum half. So, yeah, I think, even just to summarize that I've seen myself as a coach in the sense, not just to win trophies, but to help younger people to become better people and maybe give them some direction for their careers and life after rugby.
Well, I think we can't ask for two more eminently qualified guys to start a podcast with. A journalist like Jan, who's known to speak his mind. I know he's not very popular at Ellis Park. You just mentioned Ellis Park. Jan is not the most popular person over there. You coming from the coaching background, you've coached at the international level, you know what to look for. So when you guys start talking rugby, this is why this is called Rugby Unfiltered. It's rugby the way you see it, without any filters or anything. And I'm looking forward to this. So Jan, I'm going to hand the baton over to you. Let's get cracking. Rassie announced his team yesterday for the first test against Japan this weekend. So let's hear what you've got to say.
Eugene, let's dive straight into the team announcement. And we said we're going to be unfiltered, but it's a very interesting team. I think that the three standout selectors, Jason Colby at fullback. Not many people will remember that he played fullback in 2022. He started at fullback in 2022. The rest of the time he's in and out there. Then obviously Zach Porton starting at prop, and Andre Estreisen, who is the ultimate hybrid. As Rassie said yesterday, you can select a 3 or a 3-5 bench, or a 6-2 bench, or a 4-4 bench, or maybe a 4-2-1 bench. But that's Rassie. I mean, I want to know how you feel. I mean, you've worked with young players, throwing a youngster like Porton in to start in a test.
Jan, you know what? There's an old saying: if you're good enough, you're old enough. Now, Zachary Porton is one of our students at Stadi who's studying there. So I followed his career since school. Besides his leadership, and something I think Rassie also mentioned, his rugby IQ is highly intelligent. He knows the game. Sometimes you take a chance and it's going to work or not work. And a lot of people will say, but he's too young for a tight head prop to go play international rugby at that level. But I think this is the perfect game. And I'm not saying Japan are not good scrummers, but I think this is the perfect game to give him a run. He might come out of it great, or one might see that he needs a few years more to go. So I don't think that's a bad choice. And what I like about what Rassie's doing is experimenting and is giving young boys opportunity, young. And what that does, the other youngsters out there now know that they have a pathway to get into the Springbok side younger. And Cheslin, there's actually no surprises in the team for me. Cheslin's played a lot of fullback, and I'm one of those rugby supporters of Cheslin Colby. He's one of those guys. I always say you can put any scrum half in a team and he's going to, in any position. Cheslin, you can literally play in any position in the backline and he'll perform. And he's played a lot of fullback. So I don't think they're a big surprise. What I like about the side, John, there's a good mixture of youth and experience. And if things fall flat, we still got a few strong guys on the bench.
That's a good point, Lofi. We sat in on the press conference, and Rassie's press conference yesterday, and we asked him some questions. And one of the explanations he gave is why he's starting with Zach and why not playing off the bench. I mean, obviously, somebody would say, just ease him in off the bench. But Rassie, as usual, is very clever and very precise in his, in a sense, a genius in his reasoning. So let's listen. I think it's important. Let's just listen and Rassie in his own words exactly what he says.
Starting with Andre, maybe I think you could have put him at 22 or 23 if you wanted to, but I think we've chatted a lot about that. He's covering both flank and centre for us, so you can say it's a 5-3 split or a 6-2 split. So yeah, it's maybe just in the moment that when we put the team list out, we just put him there. So yeah, he covers both. So I don't think there's something big to explain there. I think everybody knows how we're trying to work with him. I do think with him covering both centre and loose forward, he'll probably get more in match day 23s, which is great for him. So I hope that explains that. Well, there was one of two ways going. Thomas du Toit is not available for this game purely because of the Premiership rulings and rest periods and so on. So Thomas is only available next week. And we've got Zach in, and if you can see the guys on the bench is guys who scrum together. Grobbies and Gerard and Wilco is guys who's used to one another, and then giving Zach a chance next to really experienced guys like Malcolm and Ox. Sometimes getting a young guy in like that, they sometimes are fearless and just enjoy the moment. Sometimes putting them on the bench, that sometimes build up the nerves. So we'll see on Saturday if it's the right call or the wrong call. It's definitely a Japanese team that scrummed well against Australia and got 100% of their ball and only gave 1 or 2 penalties away when even Australia had the ball. So it will definitely not be an easy game for him. He's probably one of the few guys in the group that we've had this year that didn't have time to really adapt to all of our plays and the way we train and the way we maul and the way we defend and all those kind of things. So a hell of a lot of information. I guess, you don't want to find that out in the last 20 minutes of the game when you have to win the game. So we just thought starting him with that solid lock pairing behind him, and obviously then have great security on the bench with guys that scrummed together in the past.
Oh, there's Rossi. As he named it, I like Rossi's thinking out of the box. He's giving this youngster a chance. He hasn't spoken more than 100 words with him, but some of the members on his staff has worked with him and they know him. So it's not an uncalculated decision to give Zachary a chance. And I don't want to repeat myself again. If there's a game that you give him a gap to scrum, it will be this one. And I think if he's going to come through, they might even consider him for the Wales game as well.
I think, it's also good for me. And the thing I want to touch on is the Andre Esterhuizen thing. I think teams must have nightmares about when Rassie selects his Springbok teams and suddenly he's got this player that can play centre or flank. Or I know that back in the days we had Bobby Skinstad and everybody said he's the ideal flank because he's got that skills but to run, or he's ideal centre, and they tried to turn him into a centre. It didn't quite pan out that way. He stayed as a loose forward, but Andre is a centre and a massive centre, and we know his strength. But yeah, he comes and he plays on the flank, and I'm sure if you put Andre on the wing, he'll be fine. He might even be fly. I think people underestimate his kicking ability. Imagine him picking up at the back of a ruck and giving a grubber, which is done before, not from a ruck, but in general backline play. So I think those kind of things, having a player that means your bench is so flexible that you can do anything. I mean, we've got the Bulls front row, which is on the bench to cover or come on for the second half, who's played together. You've got Ruan Urquia, who's a Bulls lock and captain. And then you've got Kwagga and Grant and Manie Libbok to cause havoc. I think Rassie, and we'll speak about Rassie and Eddie now, but I think Rassie, the reasoning behind his team and why he's used so many players is important. I asked him about, obviously some players he can't pick, and it's worth mentioning that this is outside the international window, which means the Premiership players, which is a guy like Tank that can't play and at proper is not available this week. Then there's the URC-based players. So 1 or 2 of the URC-based players in Europe, they also can't play. So this is basically a Japan team. And there's 9 Japan-based players in this team. So in a sense, this is Japan versus Japan. South Africa's Japan players versus Eddie Jones's Japan players. And I asked Rassie about this. And I think it's worth listening to Rassie's explanation because he puts it very succinctly exactly why he selected this team and how the challenges he faced and how he overcame the challenges of not being able to select his best team for this specific game.
You've already put out a team that I would say could play in a World Cup final, but could most likely play close to being in a World Cup final tomorrow if that was it. It was a very strong team. How much of a challenge was it?
Not so much. I think it's a very valid question, but it wasn't really a big challenge. We actually organized this game, this extra game against Japan, especially for the guys who plays in the Japanese league, because they would have not played a lot of rugby if they didn't play a lot of test matches for us. And this fixture was organized for them, and I think there's about 11 or 12 guys, if you count Mani as well now, who actually play in the Japanese league. So the plan was always to get these guys, because we found in the past that when we go in the end of year tour, previously when we played Ireland and France and teams like that, we had a bit of a slow start because some of our players who were based in Japan hasn't really played a lot of rugby, and that's why this fixture was here. So you'll see the bulk of the guys. I think the only guy that's not been picked that probably could have been picked is Peter Steff, who plays in Japan. So yeah, we because we pick players from all over the world, we totally understand the logistics around the different protocols and different competitions. And when we start planning our season, we know that already. Like the Welsh Test match at the end of the year will also be a bit of a challenge, because there's URC fixtures on for some of our franchises even on that specific weekend. So yeah, but on the other hand, it's also the positive that we still can put a pretty strong team out there. And guys like Eben is not playing, guys like Kanan is not playing, Damon Willems is not playing. There's a Faf is not even in this group, because we want him to get some game time in the Japanese league, because he would not have been in the mix for this specific game. So yeah, I can probably name quite a lot of more players, but I don't want to let it sound like I'm moaning. So no, we're fairly happy that this is what we wanted to try and achieve. Now the job is to try and go and win the match.
Yes, I think Rassi's thinking there's one thing that the public must understand. If you have a player that covers two positions, and Andre Esterhuizen is a solid unit, if you get one player that covers two, it gives you extra space for an extra player on the bench, which you also mentioned as the flexibility he brings. The great thing about it as well, now again, we're going back to the traditional bench with your three backs that you have. And that brings Grant Williams into the mix. So Grant, we know, if there's open play in the game, is loose, Grant Williams is dangerous. Him and Mani Libble. And going back to the starting lineup, the 9 and 10, Kobus and Sasha, I think we got great. There's the old saying, if you have a good 9 and a good 10, you're in for the mix. And I like that combination. I like the fact that Rassie has the vision. And you prepare your team for your opponents. And obviously this team, he did to prepare for Japan. And it seems like, if I look at the team, the game is going to be quick, the second half, because Ronald Kier and those guys can also move over the field. So I'm looking forward to this game. And most probably that takes us to the next interesting conversation about the mind games.
Eugene, I do agree with you. I think what we mustn't lose out of sight is that Grant Williams, because of his pace, can also play on the wing. And that Rassie, at one stage, people were wondering, why has he got 4 scrum halves on the team? Because they don't all just cover scrum half. They cover all these other positions. And that's where Rassie, and the beauty about this game, which I love the most about this game, you've got these two geniuses, coaches who love playing mind games with the opposition. And Rassie is a master at this. That's why you use all these players in the different combinations. But he also knows that there's a specific thought process behind his selections. While the whole world sees a madman and somebody playing games, Rassie is doing this for a purpose. He knows what he can bring off the bench. He knows that what Mani can do. He knows what Grant can do and what else he can cover. He knows that. Here's another one. He's used Kwagga Smith before in the back line. So now you've got two players there that can play either in the back line, Kwagga and Andre Esterhuizen. They can play either in the back line or in the forwards. It's massive. There's no team in the world that got that versatility. And Eddie Jones is tactically, he's a guy that comes into the game and he tactically always tries to outthink the opposition. Coaching a Japan team, a team like Japan, means he hasn't got the brute force that the Boks come with. He hasn't got the scrum power or the mauling power. So what does he do? He finds other ways of upsetting the box. And I think that's the beauty about this game, is you've got these two geniuses facing each other.
Yeah, Jan, I've had the privilege of coaching against Eddie Jones when he coached the Reds. We gave them a big hiding in Brisbane that day with a young Lions team. But he's definitely a cunning coach. But what I like about the build-up, look, Eddie will, I think he made a remark about the GOATs again, and a few remarks in his some of the press releases he made. But he's actually a great character. But what I sensed with this whole build-up of the psychological warfare of the coaches, Rassie is very low-key. He did not respond a lot, and I like it. And that makes him unpredictable. And usually he would say something back. And what I also liked in the press conference when they talked about Wessels, he just said, listen, the process must carry on. And he's focusing on the right things. And I like it that he's not chirping Eddie back. And, you know, there's only one way we can show the difference, and that's on the field. But there's also a saying for us coaches that if you cannot beat your opponents, and I think that's what Eddie Jones, although he will say we can beat them, and he knows it's going to be tough. But there's a saying that if you can't beat them, you have to outsmart them, and that's what he's going to try and do. But I don't think it's going to happen again like against that World Cup, in the World Cup.
Yeah, and I think Rassie said it as well. Eddie owes him a bottle of wine. He's actually giving Eddie a bottle of wine if he wins. So I think they'll share a bottle of wine afterwards, and then apparently Rassie has some good red wines that Eddie is after. So I think they'll share that bottle and have a good laugh at whatever happened in the game or before the game.
I also want to, there's a lot of things that people don't know. And if you sometimes just follow the media, it seems like these coaches and these guys hate each other. They don't. They're all in the same predicament. Their country, their union, expect them to win these games against all costs, sometimes against all odds. So after these games, when the pressure's off, win or lose, it's not like I remember when we won the World Cup, Steve Hansen came to me and he said, when he gave me that little trophy, he said he didn't enjoy it. But there's a camaraderie and there's a friendship between these coaches, and that's behind the scenes where they have a bottle of wine together, laugh together, and Monday back to the drawing board.
Yeah, then it's on to the next coach. Obviously, I think we both agree the Springboks are favourites for this game. I'm not going to put a margin on it. I mean, I think it'll be quite substantial. But we've got some interesting other games. I mean, we got, for me, the outside of South Africa, Japan, the big game is Ireland, New Zealand at Soldiers Field. I mean, Soldiers Field. And we know that America perhaps hasn't got such a rugby culture as South Africa. But that's a significantly historic game. Soldiers Field is where Ireland, the first time in history, beat New Zealand. It's been quite a few years, but this game has got the build-up for another big upset.
Yes, Jan. I hope, I remember that game. I think it was in 2017, around there. I just hope there's more spectators. I think there was something like between 10 and 15,000 spectators there, which didn't do the game fair. But I think it was also part of the build-up for America to try and play, to qualify, and also to host the next World Cup. But I think, to me, that is going to be a great game. But I think New Zealand has got their number, and I agree with you. It's going to be it's a very difficult game to call. But I think physically, New Zealand are just going to get into their skin and just stump them. And pride is a big thing. And muscle memory came back to the game they lost in the US. So I think they will be very well prepared and motivated for this game.
Yeah. It was 2016, Eugene. The scoreline was 40-29. But I think since then, a lot have changed. I think the fear factor of New Zealand has gone. Ireland, and like many other teams now, don't have the fear factor of New Zealand. And New Zealand is not the force it was back then. They were dominating rugby from 2010 on for almost a decade, up until the 2019 World Cup. They were dominating the scene. They were winning trophies, like we're winning trophies at the moment, like South Africa winning trophies at the moment. And 2016 removed that fear factor. And New Zealand hasn't. They've almost lost. I wouldn't say they lost that aura. They will always have that aura, but they're not as consistent as they used to be. And that's what makes this special. That's what gives Ireland a chance. And they know if Ireland, because they're a team that plays almost for Leinster all the time, you got the bulk of about 10 or 11 players that plays for Leinster with some good additions. I think that's what makes this Ireland team. That cohesion is going to make this Ireland team special.
Yeah, and I think also one must understand that rugby's in cycles of coaches and cycles of young players. And that New Zealand team that dominated all that rugby were guys that played together for 8 to 10 years. And that's why they were so phenomenal. You're right, the aura will never change. New Zealand will always be a factor. They'll always be a dangerous factor. And their cycle is halfway now. So I think you'll see they're improving. A lot of people are trying to blame the coach now on this. But building this championship side doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of belief in the players. The players need to believe in their coach. Systems that must come in place, and then one day on a good time, the team just clicks and it kicks in. But Ireland, to me, you cannot take away their passion and their support and all that stuff. But they, to me, just a team that every time when they hit the main stage, something goes wrong. Could be a belief thing. I don't know what it is. Overconfidence. I'm not by any. I don't have enough information to say that. But when they hit the big stage, it seems there's a problem, and this is a big stage. And I think New Zealand's going to thump them.
The other interesting game that I'm looking forward to is England-Australia. The two teams that are sort of on the up and also evolving as we head to the next World Cup. Twickenham, it's going to be an interesting game. I know it's a bit in the background and it's not as high profile perhaps as South Africa, Japan, or New Zealand, Ireland. But I think this is a game of two coaches trying. We know Australia's coach leaves after this year-end series, and then they select a new coach, and they've got to find. Well, they've got their new coach, but England is busy rebuilding, and also it's an interesting game. England at Twickenham is always a tough nut to crack.
Yeah, I think that to me is going to be one of the big games of the weekend, and not so low-key because those two teams are very much in par where they are now. Coming back off the field, I think Australia is making a huge mistake to get rid of Schmidt now after this end of the year rugby tour. They should have stuck with him until after the next World Cup, because that just confirms what I said about the cycles of coaches and players. You don't just hire and fire. He's busy building a very nice thing there. Now Les Kies I think is appointed as the new coach. I would take him and let him, work with Schmidt, but that's an internal problem. England to me is also a dark horse, and actually Australia and England to me, and Argentina are the dark horses at the next World Cup. So that game, I'm looking forward to that game. It's a difficult one to predict because Australia on a day can surprise any team. But I think at Twickenham, home ground, England's got a point to prove. Their supporters, God save the Queen. And it's going to be a great game to watch that.
Yeah, Eugene, just on that, Schmidt has got some family situations, which is one of the reasons he wants to go back to New Zealand to be closer to his family. So that's a personal situation. They were trying to keep him there. So that's one of those things that happen sometimes. Sometimes the unions force it, like in the case where Alistair was replaced by Rassie because there was a need for it. In this case, Australia would have loved to have kept him, but unfortunately, because of his family situation, he has to go back to New Zealand.
Okay, that makes sense because it didn't make sense to let him go. Our thoughts go with him. I think any coach, you get to a stage that you start weighing up things in your life, what's more important. And I take my hat off to coaches that coach till they in their 70s and so on, because I think there's a time that you stand back and create a platform for the next generation coaches to come coach, and you start enjoying your life, being with your family, and maybe just mentoring here and there. You know, still keeping a hand in the game itself.
Well, Eugene, that's the end of our podcast. We'll be back next week, and maybe look forward to the French game. That's a massive one. So next week we'll definitely look forward to the French game. Maybe unpack a bit of what happened on Saturday or this weekend. But I want to thank you again for joining me, and may this journey continue for a long time.